I didn't start this diary because I wanted to. I started it because I needed to remember what the first night felt like, in case we didn't get a second one. This is not a story about panic. It's a record of what we did, and why we stayed alive.
The first blast. Entry 1, the day. Everything changed. Morning. I woke up before my alarm, and for a few seconds I didn't know why. That's not unusual. I've always been a light sleeper. But that morning there was a tightness in my chest I couldn't place yet. Not fear exactly, just pressure, like I'd forgotten something important. The room was dark, quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists before the rest of the house wakes up. I lay there and listened. The furnace kicked on. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the road. The house settled. Small pops and creaks that I'd heard 1,000 times before and never thought about. I stared at the ceiling and thought about work. That's the part that bothers me now. I was thinking about emails, about deadlines, about a meeting later in the day that I didn't want to sit through. I wasn't thinking about the world, or the news, or the things I'd been quietly preparing for in the background of my life. Eventually, I got up. Routine. Everything about the morning was routine. Coffee brewed. The smell filled the kitchen. I packed a lunch I wouldn't eat. The boys woke up one by one. The oldest already talking, already forming opinions about his day. The middle one trailing behind him, copying his words. The youngest moving slower, still half in his dreams. My wife moved through the kitchen like she always did. Efficient, calm, familiar. Nothing felt urgent. That's what normal looks like. Work. Work blurred together. Screens. Conversations. People pretending the future is predictable. At one point, I found myself scrolling through news headlines, not really reading them, just confirming nothing had changed in the last 10 minutes. I caught myself doing it. Closed the app. Went back to pretending spreadsheets mattered. Someone joked about how tense the world felt lately. I smiled and said nothing. I'd learned a long time ago that people don't want to hear preparedness out loud. They want it abstract, hypothetical, something that happens to other people. The drive home. The drive home was quiet. Traffic moved normally. Stoplights cycled like they always had. The radio played music. No interruptions. No alerts. No strange tones cutting in. I stopped at a red light and glanced around. A woman adjusting her rearview mirror. A man tapping on his steering wheel. A kid in the back seat staring at a glowing screen. Everyone was moving forward, assuming tomorrow was guaranteed. I remember thinking, if something happens, it won't feel real at first. Then the light turned green. Evening. Dinner happened. Homework happened. Baths happened. I helped brush teeth, read a short story, answered the same questions I always answered. The boys went to bed without any trouble that night. I stood in the hallway for a moment after turning off the lights, listening to their breathing, letting the quiet settle. Nothing felt wrong. That's what makes it dangerous. Before sleep. My wife and I sat on the couch, the TV on low. Neither of us was really watching. I checked my phone again. Headlines looked the same. Nothing flashing, nothing urgent. I remember thinking, maybe I'm just wired this way. Always preparing, always waiting. Eventually, we turned the lights off and went upstairs. I set my phone on the nightstand like I always did. At 10:37 p.m., I closed my eyes. 10:41 p.m., the alert. The sound ripped me out of sleep. Not gradually, not gently. It felt like someone had grabbed me by the chest and yanked me awake. The emergency alert tone was already screaming before I even understood what I was hearing. My heart slammed hard enough that I felt dizzy. My wife gasped and sat upright beside me. For half a second, I couldn't move. Then training kicked in. I grabbed the phone. My fingers felt clumsy, like they weren't fully connected to my hands yet. The screen glowed white in the dark. Emergency alert. Missile impact confirmed. Multiple detonations. Approximately 100 miles west. Seek immediate shelter. I read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, like maybe the words would change. They didn't. My wife said my name. That snapped me back into my body. Switch flipped. Something in me shut off. Not emotion. Panic control. I didn't shout, didn't swear, didn't hesitate. Okay, I said. We're moving. Now. The word okay felt ridiculous, but it kept my voice steady. I reached for the headlamp on the nightstand. Red light, lowest setting. My wife mirrored me without a word. We talked about this. That mattered. Waking the boys. The boys woke up confused, groggy, scared more by our tone than anything else. The oldest asked why my phone was screaming. The middle one asked if something was wrong. The youngest just reached for me, eyes half open. I didn't explain missiles. I didn't explain nuclear weapons. I said, we're going downstairs for a bit, just like we practiced. Practice turned chaos into motion. Shoes stayed off, sweatshirts on, headlamps glowing faint red. Downstairs. The basement felt colder, heavier. I noticed things I'd never noticed before. The sound of our feet on the stairs, the way the walls seemed closer. The storage room door was already open. I guided everyone inside. The room. 8 by 10. Concrete on all sides. No windows anywhere in the basement. Shelves lined the wall exactly how I'd set them months earlier. Water jugs stacked low and wide. Food buckets labeled by calorie count. Medical kit, sealed and ready. Radios, batteries, lights. Seeing it all made my chest tighten. Relief mixed with fear. The boys sat on the foam pads. My wife wrapped blankets around them. I closed the door. Mass. I didn't sit. I stepped back out into the basement. This was the part I couldn't rush. Distance helps with blast. Mass helps with radiation. I started dragging anything dense I could find. Bins full of books, boxes of old paperwork, water jugs stacked chest high, a solid wood dresser shoved into place until my shoulders burned. I stacked everything against the walls of the room, against the door. I paused, looked, adjusted, then added more. Every pound bought time. Waiting. When I finally went back inside, the room felt smaller, too full. The boys leaned into us, quiet now. The radio crackled. Emergency messages repeated. No details. No reassurance. I checked my watch. I checked it again. Time was moving strangely now, too fast and too slow at the same time. The wind. It came later, no flash, no blinding light, just pressure. A deep rolling sound pushed against the house like a wave. The walls creaked. Dust shifted somewhere above us. The youngest whimpered. I pulled him closer and whispered, "You're safe. We're okay." I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. The first long stretch. Then nothing happened, and that was worse. No new alerts, no updates, just silence and static. I counted breaths. I counted minutes. I checked the radio again, even though I knew nothing had changed. This was only the beginning. 11:34 p.m. Once the room was sealed and stacked, there was nothing left to do. That realization hit harder than the alert itself. I've always believed that preparedness was about action. Lists, gear, plans, movement. But now, sitting on the floor of a small storage room with my family pressed against me, I understood that preparedness eventually becomes something else. Waiting. I didn't like that part. Inventory without touching. I didn't start pulling things off shelves right away. I didn't want to spook the boys. Instead, I inventoried everything in my head. Water first. I knew exactly how much was there, how many gallons, how many days it bought us at strict rationing, how much margin we had if things stretched longer than planned. I'd calculated it dozens of times before. I calculated it again anyway. Food next. Calories, not meals. That's how I always thought about it. Calories per person per day. Protein density. Shelf stability. What could be eaten cold if we had to conserve fuel? Medical supplies. I ran through scenarios I didn't want to imagine. Burns, cuts, dehydration, anxiety masquerading as something worse. I told myself to stop. There was nothing happening right now. The boys were quiet. That worried me more than crying would have. The oldest sat upright, trying to be brave. I could see it in the way he held his shoulders stiff, like he was playing a role he didn't fully understand yet. The middle one kept shifting closer, inch by inch, until his leg pressed against mine. The youngest had fallen asleep, thumb in his mouth, breathing slow and even. I focused on that breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. If he could sleep, the world couldn't be ending. That's what I told myself. My wife didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her hand rested against my arm, fingers gripping just enough to let me know she was grounding herself through touch. I knew what she was thinking because I was thinking it too. Are we really ready? Did we miss something? Is this enough? Preparedness doesn't eliminate doubt. It just gives you something to hold on to while doubt sits beside you. The radio. I finally reached for the radio. Slowly, deliberately. I didn't want the boys associating it with panic. I turned the volume down low, just enough that I could hear it if I leaned in. Static. Then a voice. Calm. Flat. Practiced. They repeated the same message we'd already heard upstairs. Impact confirmed. Multiple detonations. Seek shelter. Remain sheltered. No timelines. No reassurance. That was intentional. I understood that. Still didn't like it. Mental math. My brain wouldn't stop calculating. Distance from the reported impacts. Wind direction. I tried to remember the forecast from earlier in the day. Time to fallout arrival. I pictured invisible particles drifting down, settling on roofs, yards, streets. I imagined people outside. I forced myself to stop. That kind of thinking didn't help anyone in this room. Checking the seal. I stood up slowly. The room felt tighter when I moved. I checked the plastic sheeting around the door again, pressing tape down with my thumb, smoothing edges that didn't need smoothing. I knew it was fine. I checked anyway. I checked the air gap, the filter setup, the placement of supplies so nothing blocked airflow. I told myself I was being thorough. Really, I was burning nervous energy. Time slips. Minutes stopped behaving normally. 10 minutes felt like an hour. An hour felt like nothing. I checked my watch again. Still before midnight. That surprised me. I had expected more time to have passed. That's when I realized how long this night might feel. First, sounds above us. Somewhere upstairs, the house shifted. Pipes clicked. The furnace kicked on and off. Every sound made my heart jump before my brain caught up. I listened carefully for things I didn't want to hear. Sirens, shouting, breaking glass. There was none of that. Just the normal sounds of a house continuing to exist. That felt surreal. Explaining without explaining. The oldest finally whispered, "Dad?" I leaned closer. "What's going on?" I paused. I chose my words carefully. "There was a big explosion far away," I said. "We're staying down here for a bit to be extra safe." "Are we in trouble?" I shook my head. "No, we're prepared." That word mattered. Prepared. He nodded and leaned back against the wall. He didn't ask more. That hurt. Water. I handed out water next. Not because anyone was thirsty. Because routine matters. Small sips. I made a mental note of how much we used. I always did. The wind. Again. Sometime later, I didn't know how long, the house groaned softly. Not loud, just enough. A pressure wave, delayed and tired by the distance. The boys stirred. The youngest whimpered again. I pulled him closer, my hand on his back, feeling the rise and fall. Still breathing. That mattered more than anything else. Radio update. The radio crackled again. A new message this time. Remain sheltered. Fallout expected within the hour. Do not go outside. I closed my eyes for a moment. This was the window I'd prepared for. This was why the room existed. Final checks. I went through everything one more time. Lighting, minimal. Batteries, untouched. Food, sealed. Medical, accessible. Bathroom setup, ready but unused. I told myself we were exactly where we needed to be. I believed it. Mostly. Trying to rest. I sat back down. Leaning against the wall, I finally let my head rest. My body was exhausted. My mind refused to follow. Every scenario tried to play out at once. I forced myself to focus on small things. Counting breaths. Feeling my wife's hand. Listening to the radio hum. Preparedness, I realized, wasn't about being fearless. It was about functioning while afraid. After midnight. At some point, midnight passed. I knew because I checked my watch and felt a strange sense of relief that the day had changed. As if the worst had happened yesterday. The boys slept again. All three of them. Pressed together, trusting us completely. That trust weighed more than the stacked books outside the door. Closing the entry. Nothing else happened that night, and that was the hardest part. No climax, no resolution, just waiting in a small room, surrounded by supplies and thoughts, while the world outside changed in ways we couldn't see. This was only the first night.
I didn't start this diary because I wanted to. I started it because I needed to remember what the first night felt like, in case we didn't get a second one. This is not a story about panic. It's a record of what we did, and why we stayed alive.
A Prepper's Diary, the first blast. Entry 2, 4:07 a.m. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember my eyes closing. The radio still murmuring emergency messages. My wife nudging my arm every so often, just to make sure I was still there. Then suddenly, it was morning. Not morning like sunlight and birds. Morning like your body decides it's time to be awake, even though nothing has changed. I checked my watch. 4:07 a.m. The boys were still asleep, all three of them, curled up on the foam pads, blankets pulled tight, breathing slow and deep. The kind of sleep only kids can manage when the world is falling apart quietly. I didn't move at first. I just listened. The radio crackled softly. Outside, nothing. No sirens, no traffic, no dogs barking. Just the low, steady sound of wind moving past the house. That silence felt wrong. The bathroom. A small hand touched my arm. I flinched before I realized who it was. My middle son, 6 years old. His eyes were half open, face pale in the dim light, whispering like the room itself might be listening. "Dad, I gotta go to the bathroom." I nodded. No hesitation. I grabbed the headlamp, red light only, and guided him to the corner where I'd set up the makeshift toilet the night before. Bucket, liner, absorbent material. He looked at it for a second, confused. I knelt down, kept my voice low. "It's okay, just like we talked about." He nodded again, trusting me without question. That trust hit harder than fear ever could. The world outside. While he sat there, I listened again. Still nothing. The house didn't creak. No distant engines. No voices. Just wind. That scared me more than noise would have. When he finished, I helped him clean up, sealed the bag carefully, tucked it away exactly where it was supposed to go. Routine matters, even now, especially now. The question. We sat back down together. He leaned against me, pulling the blanket around his shoulders. After a minute, he asked the question I'd been dreading. "How long do we have to stay down here?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I rubbed his back slowly, buying time. "A little while," I said finally, "until it's safe." "How will we know?" I swallowed. "We'll hear it on the radio." He seemed okay with that. Kids accept uncertainty better than adults sometimes. He rested his head against my arm and drifted back to sleep. I didn't. Breakfast. Around 6, my wife stirred. She looked at me, eyes tired, asking a question without words. I nodded. It was time. Breakfast wasn't really breakfast. Energy bars, a couple of apples, one banana. Fruit she'd grabbed on the way down the stairs the night before, almost as an afterthought. I divided everything evenly. No complaints. The boys ate quietly, still groggy, still confused, but calmer than I expected. I told myself that was a good sign. The knock. It happened just after 7. A loud, sharp bang. Then another. Not distant, not muffled. From the front of the house. The boys froze. My wife's hand went to her mouth. Another bang. I felt my stomach drop. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking more than I wanted to admit, and pulled up the security camera feed. The image loaded slowly. Then I saw her. A woman. Alone. Standing on our front porch. She looked wrecked. Hair tangled. Face streaked with dirt. Eyes wild with fear. She was knocking, then stepping back, then knocking again. Looking around like she expected someone to be watching. I felt my wife's eyes on me. The decision. We didn't argue out loud. We whispered. "She needs help," my wife said. I nodded. I knew that. "She can't be out there," she whispered again. I knew that too. But I also knew something else. The fallout would still be coming down. Radiation levels wouldn't peak for hours. Opening that door would mean letting contaminated air inside, letting danger in. "I can't," I said quietly. The words tasted awful. "She won't survive out there," my wife said. I closed my eyes. "I know." Another knock. Louder this time. The boys were watching us now, confused, scared. I forced myself to smile. "It's okay," I said. "Just a noise outside." I turned the volume on the camera down. We waited. After a while, she stopped knocking. She stood there for a moment longer, then walked out of frame. I didn't watch where she went. After she left, I didn't move for a long time. I kept staring at the camera feed, even after she disappeared from the frame, like she might come back if I looked hard enough. She didn't. The porch stayed empty. The wind pushed a few leaves across the concrete. One of the hanging decorations swung slowly, tapping the siding with a dull, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. I finally locked the phone screen and sat back against the wall. That's when it hit me. Not fear, not relief, guilt. The weight of the choice. I told myself I'd done the right thing. I repeated it silently, like a mantra. You protected your family. That's your job. That's the priority. All true. And still, my chest felt tight. I kept seeing her face in my head. The way she looked straight at the door when she knocked. Not angry, not demanding, just desperate. I wondered how long she'd been walking, how many doors she'd tried before ours, how many stayed closed. Running the numbers. My brain did what it always does when emotion gets too loud. It went to math. Food first. I knew exactly what we had. Calories per person. Days at full rations. Days at reduced rations. Adding another adult didn't just shorten our timeline. It changed everything. Water was worse. Water always does. Each additional person eats into margin faster than food ever does. And that was assuming nothing went wrong. Assuming no injuries. No sickness. No extended shelter time. Assuming the best case version of reality. Radiation. Then there was the radiation. I thought about the timing. Time since detonation. Wind direction overnight. Expected fallout arrival window. If levels outside were already above 20 or 30 rads per hour, that thought stopped me cold. At those levels, exposure doesn't forgive kindness. Even if I'd opened the door, even if I'd brought her inside, there was a very real chance she wouldn't make it regardless. I hated that thought, but it mattered, because it meant this wasn't a simple choice between help and don't help. It was a choice between risking my family and possibly delaying the inevitable for her. That didn't make it easier, but it made it clearer. The other possibility. Then another thought crept in, one I didn't want to acknowledge. What if she wasn't alone? What if she was testing the door? What if there were others just out of view? I hated myself for thinking that. But I'd planned for it. We'd all planned for it. Desperation doesn't make people evil, but it makes them unpredictable. And unpredictability is dangerous, especially now. Good people, bad outcomes. I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. What does being a good person mean right now? Before all of this, the answer was easy. Help someone in need. Open the door. Do the right thing. But this wasn't before. This was after. After the rules changed. After the consequences became permanent. Being a good person didn't mean the same thing it used to. It meant choosing who you were responsible for and who you weren't. If it was someone I knew, that's the thought that hurt the most. What if it had been someone I recognized? A neighbor? A coworker? A friend? Would I have opened the door? I didn't like the answer that formed in my head, because I wasn't sure. And that uncertainty scared me more than the situation itself. The truth I didn't want. The truth was uncomfortable. This decision didn't make me a hero, and it didn't make me a villain. It made me a father, a husband, someone trying to make the least wrong choice in a situation where there were no right ones. I realized something then, something I hadn't expected. This wouldn't be the last time I faced that question. Someone else would come along eventually, and when they did, I'd have to decide again. Living with it. I looked at my boys, still playing quietly, still safe, still here. I looked at my wife, watching me carefully, knowing exactly what I was thinking without asking. I took a slow breath. I didn't know if I could live with that decision forever, but I knew I could live with it today. And today was all that mattered. Distraction. I needed to change the energy in the room. "Hey," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "Who wants to play a game?" The boys perked up instantly. Board game. Simple rules. Something familiar. They leaned in, laughing softly, arguing over turns like nothing had happened. I watched them play and wondered how long that could last. The math in my head. While they played, my mind ran numbers. Time since detonation. Expected radiation decay. The rule of sevens. I counted hours without realizing it. I knew we couldn't leave the room today. Or tomorrow. At least 2 more days, maybe more. The thought settled heavily in my chest. The broadcast. The radio crackled again. A new tone, different from before. The announcer's voice was steady but strained. Then, the president. He spoke carefully. Attacks confirmed. Multiple locations. Unknown actors. A state of emergency declared across the Midwest and East Coast. Retaliatory strikes underway. I looked at my wife. She looked at me. Neither of us said what we were thinking. The boys listened quietly, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of it. When it ended, the room felt smaller. The cat. A scratching sound broke the silence. Soft at first, then louder. At the door. My wife's eyes widened. "The cat," she whispered. I felt sick. We had forgotten. The scratching continued. Confused. Persistent. "She'll calm them down," my wife said. "They love her." I hesitated, Opening the door meant risk, but the radiation levels were still low. We hadn't seen dust, no alerts about peak fallout yet. I cracked the door open just enough. The cat slipped in immediately, brushing past my leg like nothing had changed. I sealed the door again as fast as I could. The boys smiled. That alone almost made it worth it. Power. Later in the day, I pulled a cord from behind the shelving. I'd run it months ago. 2 solar panels outside, wired discreetly, feeding into a charge controller and battery tucked into the corner. I powered up the laptop. The boys' eyes lit up. Cartoons. Saved episodes. Offline. Familiar voices. The room felt lighter. For a moment. The air. That's when I noticed it. The air felt heavy, stale. Not bad, just thin. I checked the seal. Too tight. I looked at the vent. Closed. We needed fresh air. But outside, I sat there, staring at the wall, weighing the risk. This was the part no checklist could answer. I felt my wife watching me, waiting. I didn't move yet. End of entry 2. We stayed put, listening, breathing slowly, waiting for the next decision. The hardest part wasn't fear. It was knowing that every choice from here on out would matter more than the last.
I didn't start this diary because I wanted to. I started it because I needed to remember what the first night felt like, in case we didn't get a second one. This is not a story about panic. It's a record of what we did, and why we stayed alive.
A Prepper's Diary. The First Blast. Entry 3. The air we breathe. Midday, time without meaning. I didn't know what time it was until I checked my watch. Down here, time didn't behave the way it should. There was no morning light, no afternoon shadows, no sunset to mark the day's end. Just numbers and fatigue, the kind that creeps in slowly and convinces you it's normal. Noticing the air. It wasn't obvious at first. That was the part that bothered me most. The air didn't smell bad. It wasn't hot. It wasn't heavy enough to alarm anyone who wasn't already paying attention. But I was paying attention. I felt it in my chest before I could explain it. Breaths felt shallow, like the room was asking us to take less with every inhale. I watched the boys, still breathing evenly, still okay. I watched my wife. She caught me looking and gave a small nod. She felt it too. That told me everything. Air is different. You can store food. You can store water. You can store fuel. Air doesn't wait for you to notice. Air doesn't care how prepared you are. It just slowly reminds you that you're alive, and fragile. I'd planned for this. That didn't make it easier. The seal that worked too well. The storage room had done its job too well. Every crack sealed, every gap filled, every door reinforced. Perfect for fallout. Not great for 5 people and a cat sharing the same oxygen for hours on end. I knelt by the door and ran my hand along the seal, feeling for leaks. Nothing. That was the problem. The filter. I checked the filter system again. Homemade. Overbuilt. Tested more times than I could count. The intake hose ran just outside the storage room, into the rest of the basement. Concrete walls, earth on all sides. The basement itself was already decent protection, better than anywhere else in the house. The filter would handle dust, particles, anything heavy enough to settle. At least, that was the theory. The theory had always held up before. I'd left the intake damper closed on purpose, sealed tight, no airflow. The room was meant to be airtight unless we decided otherwise. That was the trade-off. Protection versus breath. Once you let air move, you can't undo it. The moment before, my hand hovered over the damper handle longer than it needed to. Turning it meant committing, letting air move, trusting the system instead of the seal. I pictured invisible dust drifting through the basement air, settling where I couldn't see it. I pictured radiation levels I didn't know for sure. Then I pictured my kids breathing shallow air for another hour. The choice made itself. Letting the room breathe. I turned the damper slowly, just enough. No rush, no sudden movement. Then I flipped the switch. The filter hummed to life. Low, steady, almost comforting. I watched the pressure gauge, listened to the motor. Nothing spiked, nothing strained. Air began to move. Just enough. Breaths felt deeper, easier. I didn't realize how tense my shoulders were until they dropped. My wife exhaled slowly and squeezed my arm. "Better," she whispered. I nodded. Problem solved. For now. Buying time again. That's all we ever seemed to be doing. Buying time. The boys didn't even notice. That felt like a win. They were busy with a board game again, arguing softly over whose turn it was. Normal problems. I let myself enjoy that for a moment. Late afternoon, 3:18 p.m. I checked my watch again. 3:18 p.m. I said it out loud this time, more for myself than anyone else. Late afternoon. We'd made it most of the day. That mattered. Keeping life normal. My wife kept things moving. She always does. She started pulling food from the shelf quietly, like she didn't want to draw attention to it. No heat, no noise, nothing that felt like a last resort. She laid everything out on a clean towel. Peanut butter, crackers, a couple of foiled tuna packets, some dried fruit. Simple, the kind of food you don't think twice about when nothing's wrong. She portioned it carefully, not measured, but intentional. Enough to feel full, not enough to feel indulgent. The boys ate without complaint. That alone felt like a small miracle. Every warm meal felt like a small victory. She divided food carefully, not rigid, not careless, balanced. That balance mattered more than the food itself. Late afternoon, the long wait. After we ate, the room got quiet again. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind where you start noticing things you hadn't paid attention to before. The way the walls felt closer than they had in the morning. The way even small movements felt louder than they should. I checked my watch. 3:47 p.m. Less than 30 minutes since the meal. It felt like longer. Time starts to stretch. I tried not to check my watch again right away. That's a mistake people make. When you start watching time, it turns against you. Still, I checked again. 4:02 p.m. 15 minutes had passed. I let out a slow breath and leaned back against the wall. Down here, time didn't move in a straight line. It bent. It slowed. It doubled back on itself. I reminded myself that this was normal. Isolation does that. Waiting does that. The body notices first. I became aware of my body in pieces. A dull pressure behind my eyes. Dryness in my throat that didn't quite feel like thirst. A tightness in my shoulders I hadn't let go of since the knock at the door. I stretched my neck slowly, careful not to bump into anyone. The boys were quieter now, not asleep, just still. That worried me more than noise would have. Rechecking what I already knew. I stood up and walked the room again, not because anything was wrong, because movement feels like control. I checked the filter, still running, sound steady. I checked the battery level, unchanged. I checked the seal around the door again, running my fingers along the edges, even though I'd done it twice already. Everything was exactly how it should be. That didn't stop my brain from asking, but what if it isn't? The kids feel it too. My oldest shifted on his pad and sighed. Not dramatically, just enough to let me know he was bored. "Can we do something?" he asked. I nodded. "Sure." But my mind stalled for a second. We'd already done the games, the cartoons, the stories. I hated that pause, that moment where I didn't immediately have an answer. My wife stepped in without a word. She handed him a pencil and a small notebook. "Draw something," she said. "Anything." He did. That's what she does. She fills gaps before they turn into cracks. The quiet leadership. I watched her for a moment. She moved slowly, deliberately, not wasting energy, not rushing. She kept checking on the boys without hovering. She didn't ask me questions she already knew the answers to. She trusted the setup. She trusted me. That trust was heavier than fear. The mental spiral. My thoughts started looping. What if the filter failed overnight? Each thought led nowhere useful. I recognized it for what it was. Noise. Mental static. I forced myself to stop. I picked a concrete task. Inventory. Counting without counting. I didn't pull out lists. I didn't write anything down. I just went through it in my head. Food. Stable. Water. Stable. Power. Uncertain but manageable. Air. Acceptable for now. I told myself that if something changed, I'd know. And if I knew, I'd act. That was the agreement I made with myself. The room feels smaller. As the afternoon dragged on, the room seemed to shrink. Not physically, psychologically. There were fewer places to look that didn't involve another person. I stared at the concrete wall for a long time. It had small imperfections, lines, bubbles, rough patches. I traced them with my eyes like a map. Anything to give my mind somewhere to go. Pulling back. I realized then that the hardest part of this wasn't fear. It was restraint. Not doing something just to feel useful. Not reacting to every sensation. Not letting your thoughts outrun your information. Preparedness isn't about action. It's about timing. Waiting as a skill. I sat back down, leaned my head against the wall, closed my eyes for a moment. I focused on breathing, slow, steady, in, out. The radio murmured on, filling the silence just enough. We weren't in danger right now. That was the truth. I held on to it. The radio keeps talking. The radio stayed on. It always does. Updates came and went, vague and careful. Reassurances without timelines. Statements without details. No one wanted to say the wrong thing. No one wanted to promise anything. I understood that. It didn't make listening any easier. The first cough. It was small, barely noticeable. My youngest cleared his throat once, then again a few minutes later. Nothing dramatic. Kids cough. I told myself that immediately. Dry air, dust, nerves. He coughed again, once, then settled. I told myself it was nothing. I didn't say it out loud. Still, I watched him a little more closely after that. He seemed fine, laughing, playing. I made a mental note and moved on, for now. When the lights flickered, the flicker came without warning. A brief dimming, then normal again. My wife and I looked at each other. We didn't say anything. The boys didn't notice. A minute later, it happened again. Longer this time. Then the lights went out completely. Silence. No hum. No buzz. Just the radio, still talking. The grid was gone. What I already knew. I wasn't surprised. I'd expected it. That didn't make it easier. I switched the storage room lights over to battery power. Soft glow. Enough. But solar power is a promise, not a guarantee. Dust in the air. Overcast skies. Unknown conditions above ground. Panels don't care about planning. They care about sunlight. The limit set in. This was the part that wore on me. Not fear, limits. Everything now had an edge. Every decision borrowed from something else. I felt tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. The coffee. I needed something. Not calories. Not information. Something human. I pulled out the small percolator and the butane burner. My wife smiled the second she saw it. That alone was worth it. The flame lit cleanly. The smell hit first. Coffee. Real coffee. Not instant. Not powdered. The boys watched with wide eyes as I poured hot chocolate into their cups. Steam curled into the room, warm and familiar. For a few minutes, the storage room felt like a kitchen again. What it did for us. The coffee didn't change our situation, but it changed us. It reminded us that we were still people, not just bodies waiting out a disaster. The boys laughed, quietly. My wife wrapped her hands around her mug like it was something sacred. I felt the tightness in my chest loosen just a little. Morale isn't optional. It's fuel. Evening without light. Eventually, I checked my watch again. Evening. At least according to the numbers. I dimmed the lights. No reason to waste power. The radio stayed close. The boys curled up against me, their weight familiar. Grounding. My youngest coughed once more. Soft. I rubbed his back until he settled. The protector. My wife held my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. down here, I wasn't just the planner. I was the protector, and that responsibility felt heavier than any gear I'd ever carried. The thought that waited. Today, we were okay. We'd made the right calls. But tomorrow without grid power would bring new problems. Different ones. I didn't think about them yet. I couldn't. For now, we were breathing. We were warm. We were together. That had to be enough.
I didn't start this diary because I wanted to. I started it because I needed to remember what the first night felt like, in case we didn't get a second one. This is not a story about panic. It's a record of what we did, and why we stayed alive.
A Prepper's Diary, the first blast. Entry 4, the long night, evening. The illusion of normal. It was somewhere between 7 and 8 when we finally ate something that felt like food. Not just calories, not just open and dump. A real warm meal. The kind you don't appreciate until the world stops giving them to you. My wife had been rationing the little things without saying it out loud. Paper towels, wipes, the last clean dish rag. She was doing bathroom duty like it was a job, keeping the boys moving in a rhythm so none of it turned into panic. A bucket, a lid, a trash bag, a sprinkle of lime, hand sanitizer. The same instructions over and over. Calm voice, no sharp edges. The lights in the storage room were on, but only because I'd forced them to be. 2 LED strips along the beam, a dim lantern in the corner, and that little battery fan that kept the air filter pulling. The filter wasn't quiet anymore. It had a tired sound, like a person breathing through a straw. The panels outside, 200 watts total, 2 folding 100-watt panels, had bought us time. Not safety. Time. In the afternoon, they'd been decent. Even through haze, they were still pushing a little, enough to top off the batteries if nothing else changed. But something did change. The light outside had started to look wrong. Not dark, just muted. A dirty kind of overcast that didn't belong to weather. The kind of sky you see in old photographs after a big fire, when the sun looks like it's behind frosted glass. The boys didn't know any of this. The youngest was on my wife's lap, warm cheeks, little hands, half asleep and fussy. The middle one was lining up some batteries on the floor like toy soldiers. And my oldest, 8 years old, had been quiet for hours. Not scared loud, scared quiet. He sat with his back against a tote, knees pulled up, watching everything without asking questions. Because he'd learned questions didn't change answers. We ate. We smiled when they looked at us. We tried to talk about normal things, but normal is a costume, and it starts to itch when you've worn it too long. I checked the battery readout twice while my wife wasn't looking. 83%, 79. Then it stabilized again as the panels trickled in a little charge. A slow drip, a faucet you can't trust. I told myself, this is fine. I told myself, this is temporary. I told myself a lot of things. Then my youngest started coughing. Night, the cough. It began like a throat tickle. A small cough that sounded more annoying than dangerous. My wife shifted him on her lap, rubbed his back, and he settled. Then 10 minutes later, it happened again. Cough. Pause. Cough, cough. And then that little inhale that makes a parent's brain light up like a warning panel. My wife looked at me without saying anything. That look is a language. It means, do something. It means, fix it. It means, tell me we're not going to lose him. I moved closer and put my hand on his chest. Warm, fast breathing, not frantic yet. I leaned close and listened. There was a sound under the cough, faint but there, a tightness. My mind started doing what it always does when it's scared. It turned into a checklist: fever, rash, vomiting, confusion, trouble breathing, blue lips, wheezing. He wasn't vomiting. He wasn't confused. He was just tired and coughing. And that scared me more than it should have, because in my head, everything led back to the same place. Fallout, radiation, contamination, the invisible stuff. My wife whispered, "He's getting worse." I nodded like I knew what to do. The truth was, I knew what to do when the problem had a label. A broken pipe, a dead battery, a pantry that needed stocking. But a sick kid? A sick kid in a world where the hospital might not exist anymore? That was a different kind of problem. We laid him down on the sleeping pad and propped him up with a rolled blanket. My wife sat beside him, one hand on his back, feeling every breath. I went back to the totes, medicine bin, first aid bag, respiratory. I pulled out what I could: kid's fever reducer, cough syrup, a thermometer, a pulse oximeter I'd bought on a whim years ago, saline spray, Vicks, a spare N95 I wasn't even sure mattered anymore. I took his temperature, a mild fever, not terrible. I checked his oxygen, 96. That number should have calmed me down. It didn't, because it wasn't the number that mattered. It was the trend. The cough came in waves. He'd settle for a while, then his chest would tighten again, and he'd wake up coughing like something was squeezing him from the inside. Time moved wrong down here. There was no window, no clocks that meant anything. Just the dim light and the hum of the filter that we were running on borrowed time. I sat there and listened to my son breathe, and my brain started doing another thing it does when it's trying to protect itself. It started arguing with itself. It's just a cold. Kids get sick. He'll be fine. Then, what if it isn't a cold? What if this is something else? What if it's the air? The air. The thing we'd been treating like the enemy since the blast. I thought about the filter upstairs, the duct tape, the plastic sheeting, the sealed door, all the work, all the preparation, and still, the air could be the thing that killed us. My wife whispered, "What do we do?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out, because the real answer was, we do what we can, and we hope. Late night, the temptation. The cough got worse around midnight, not dramatically, not like a movie, just slowly, like a hand turning a knob, tighter, more frequent, less rest between, He started coughing until his eyes watered. My wife's face went pale in the lantern light. She looked at me again. That look. Fix it. I dug deeper into the bin, and I found the thing I'd almost forgotten I'd packed. A small container, sealed, labeled in black marker, fish antibiotics. I'd bought them years ago, back when collapse was something you said half-jokingly. Back when buying something like that felt like a rebellious little secret, not something you'd ever use, not in normal life, not when you could go to urgent care and get a prescription like a normal person. But normal life was gone, and here it was, a solution that wasn't a solution, a choice that was really a question. Are you willing to gamble your child's body on something you cannot truly verify? My wife noticed my hesitation. She whispered, "What is that?" I didn't want to say it, because saying it made it real. I said, "It's antibiotics." She stared at it, then at me, then at our son, and in her eyes I saw it. That terrible math every parent knows. Risk versus risk. Fear versus fear. I sat there with that bottle in my hand, and I realized something I'd never understood when I bought it. Preparedness doesn't always make the decision easier. Sometimes it makes it heavier, because now the option exists. Now you're responsible for choosing it. Or not. I ran through symptoms again, forcing myself to stay rational. Fever, mild, oxygen, still okay. Cough, worse. Wheeze, maybe. Chest tightness, yes. Could it be bacterial? Maybe. Could it be viral? Probably. Could antibiotics help? Only if I guessed right. Could antibiotics harm? Absolutely. And then the thought that stopped me cold. If I give him something wrong, and he gets worse, I will never forgive myself. I put the bottle down. I didn't throw it away. I didn't judge myself for having it. I just set it aside, not because I was certain, because I wasn't. I told my wife, "Not yet." She nodded. She didn't fight me. She just kept rubbing his back in slow circles, like she could physically push the sickness out. And we made it through the next wave, then the next, then the next. In the dark, with a tired air filter and a dying solar trickle, we did what parents have done forever. We stayed awake and listened to our child breathe. Early morning, the broadcast. It was sometime after 3 when the radio finally changed. Not the static, not the emergency tone, the voice. A real broadcast voice, clearer than anything we'd heard since the first blast. For a second I didn't move, because the sudden normalcy of it felt wrong, like hearing music in a graveyard. I turned the volume down, just enough. My wife looked at me. The boys were mostly asleep. Mostly. My oldest wasn't. He was lying still with his eyes closed, but I knew that trick. He was listening. The voice said,
"This is a national emergency update. This message is being relayed through surviving broadcast infrastructure. If you can hear this, remain sheltered. Remain calm. Do not travel unless absolutely necessary."
A pause. And then the part that made my stomach go tight.
Confirmed detonations have occurred in multiple U.S. cities.
My wife's hand froze on our son's back. I leaned closer to the radio. The voice continued, steadier than any human should be allowed to sound.
Chicago, St. Louis, and New York City, Washington, and D.C.
My wife made a small sound, like air escaping. I didn't. I couldn't. Because my brain had already left the room. It was moving across a map. The anchor's voice went on.
Initial investigation indicates this was not a conventional foreign missile launch. Evidence suggests a coordinated cyber attack targeted U.S. nuclear command and control systems, resulting in unauthorized launches and catastrophic failures across multiple silos.
A pause as if to let the meaning sink in. Then the sentence that changed everything. Our own weapons were used against us. I looked at my wife. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I had to. I whispered. It wasn't just one. She whispered back, How many? I didn't answer, because the number didn't matter. The permanence did. My oldest shifted slightly, so slight you'd miss it if you weren't his father. He heard. He understood enough. And that broke my heart in a way the blast never could. Because bombs are outside. This was inside. The broadcast continued with instructions. Shelter, ration, avoid travel, conserve resources. But the words were falling through me, because the only thing my mind could hold was a single thought, repeating like a drumbeat. This is not a weekend. This is not a storm. This is not going back. The math, Chicago, and the wind. When the broadcast faded back into static, I didn't move for a long time. My wife whispered, What does it mean for us? That question, the one every person asks when disaster becomes real. What does it mean for me? For my kids? For my house? For this room we'd turned into a bunker? I took a slow breath and forced my thoughts into something I could control. Numbers, distance, time. The only tools that still obeyed rules. Chicago, I said quietly. Chicago is the one that matters most for us. We were in Michigan, south central Michigan, not right on the border, not on the coast, but not far enough to pretend we weren't connected to the rest of the world. If the wind did what the wind usually does, we were downwind. I closed my eyes and pictured the map. Chicago to here, roughly a couple 100 miles, give or take. I didn't need perfection. I needed order of magnitude. How fast is the wind? I whispered to myself. I didn't know, not exactly, but I'd heard it in the first alerts. I'd felt the way the trees moved before we sealed up. It wasn't a calm day, maybe 20 miles an hour, maybe 30. It didn't have to be exact if it was moving at around 30 miles an hour, and the distance was around 200 miles. 200 divided by 30, about 6 to 7 hours. Fallout travel time. If the worst of it formed and moved with the wind, the leading edge could reach us within hours. And the thing about fallout, the part nobody wants to say out loud, is that time is everything. Radiation drops fast at first, not because it's gone, because the most dangerous stuff burns out quickly. I'd read about it years ago, the rule of sevens. 7 hours after detonation, radiation drops to about 1/10 of what it was. 49 hours, about 2 days, down to about 1/100th. It wasn't a magic shield, it was math. My wife whispered, So, how bad is it outside? I stared at the floor, and I did the hardest thing a prepper can do. I admitted uncertainty. I don't know, I said. Not exactly. Then I forced myself forward, but I can estimate. I pictured the numbers the way I'd read them in books and manuals. Ground zero can be unimaginably high right after a detonation. Thousands of rads per hour in the worst zones. But we weren't ground zero. We were far. Distance and dilution matter. And not all of the fallout would even reach us. Some drops closer, some blows off, some never makes it. If Chicago was a source, and it took roughly 7 hours for the plume to reach us, then by the time the worst of it arrived, the radiation level in that dust would already be lower than it was immediately after. Not safe. Lower. And then there's the fraction. Even if the plume came our way, we wouldn't get Chicago-level fallout. We'd get a slice of it. 10%, 20%, something like that. Enough to kill you with time. Enough to make outside a place you don't go casually anymore. I spoke softly, more to myself than to her. If the source was extreme, right after, say 1,000 rads per hour near the worst areas, and by the time it gets here, it's decayed and thinned. I swallowed. Then we could be looking at tens of rads per hour outside at the worst of it. Maybe more, maybe less. My wife's eyes widened slightly. Tens. That word is a knife. Not instant death. Not harmless. A slow problem. The kind that forces you to make choices that feel wrong no matter what. And now? She asked. I glanced at the dim light, the tired filter. Now it's been about a day, I said. 24 hours. Not 7, not 49. But enough time for the steep drop at the beginning. If it was, say 50 to 70 rads per hour when the main dust first reached our area, I whispered, careful, steady. Then a day later, it could be down to 20 or 30, something like that. I held up a hand quickly before she could grab onto the numbers like certainty. That's not a promise. It's an estimate. She stared at the floor. 20 or 30, she repeated like tasting the words. I nodded. That's still not something you live in, I said. That's still limit exposure. Minutes, not hours. She nodded slowly. And then her eyes went to our son, and the math changed, because math is one thing, a coughing child is another. The realization. Asthma. My son coughed again, tighter than before. He sat up, eyes glossy, trying to pull air like he was drinking through a straw. My wife shifted him, propped him higher, rubbed his back. He wheezed. And in that wheeze, clearer now, unmistakable, something clicked in my head. Asthma, not the abstract concept, not some kids have it. Asthma as a threat. Asthma as a thing that can turn a bad night into a funeral. My wife whispered, "He needs his inhaler." And I felt a cold wave roll through me, because I knew exactly where it was. Not down here, not in the bins, not in the go bags, not in the medical tote. The spare. The backup bottle we'd meant to bring inside. The one that had stayed in the van because the day had become chaos too fast. Parked in our driveway. Outside. In the world. My wife's eyes filled with fear that had been waiting all day. "I thought you put it in here," she whispered. I didn't defend myself, because she was right. I should have. I should have. I should have. That phrase is poison during collapse. It doesn't help. It just burns. I took my son's oxygen again. 94. Still okay, but trending. Always trending. The fish antibiotics sat in my mind like a shadow. Not relevant now. Not the right tool, not the right problem. This wasn't infection. This was constriction. This was a narrowing future. My wife whispered, "Can you go get it?" And I looked at her like she'd asked me to walk into fire, because in a way she had. I thought about the outside, about dust, about invisible numbers, about wind, about radiation levels that didn't care how good a father I was. I whispered, "Not tonight." Her face tightened. I didn't blame her. If I were her, I would have hated me in that moment. But I forced myself to stay steady. "It's dark," I said. "We're exhausted. The levels are still high. I need to do it right." She stared at me. Then she nodded once. Because she understood what I meant. If I went outside, panicked and sloppy, I might not come back. And then what? We spent the rest of the night managing. Steam from a small cup of warmed water to help his breathing. Slow sips. Positioning. Saline. My wife's hand never left his back. My hand never left the battery readout. We traded roles without speaking. Her job was keeping him calm. My job was keeping the room alive. The filter hummed. Then it dipped. Then it hummed again. The panels outside weren't doing much now. The overcast had thickened. Whether it was weather or ash or fallout haze, I didn't know. I just knew the solar input was barely a trickle, and the battery percentage was doing the slow walk downward. 72, 68, 65. Every number a reminder we were not in control. We were negotiating. Morning. The decision. At some point the cough eased. Not gone, just less aggressive. My son finally slept. Not deep, not peaceful, but asleep. My wife leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed, still listening like a radar. The middle boy was curled into a ball under a blanket. And my oldest was staring at the ceiling. I met his eyes. He didn't ask anything. He just looked at me like he already knew the answers. And that's when it hit me. Harder than the broadcast. Harder than the math. My kids were going to remember this as the night everything changed. Not the blast. Not the sirens. This. The dark. The coughing. The whispering. The quiet fear. The way their parents tried to be steady while the world crumbled. The light outside began to shift. Not sunlight exactly. More like the world becoming less black. A dull gray bleeding into the edges of everything. Morning. Morning should have felt like relief. It didn't. It felt like a deadline. because morning meant I had to do what I'd been promising myself I could avoid. Morning meant the van. Morning meant opening the door. Morning meant stepping into the world that had become numbers. Tens of rads per hour. Minutes, not hours. A risk you can't feel until it's too late. I looked at the battery readout again. 58%. The filter was still running, but it sounded weaker, like it was tired of saving us. My wife opened her eyes. She whispered, "Is it morning?" I nodded. She whispered, "Are you going?" I didn't answer right away, because saying yes made it real. I looked at my youngest, still sleeping, mouth slightly open, breathing shallow but steady. I looked at my wife, hair messy, face drawn, but still holding the line. I looked at my oldest, awake, absorbing everything like a man trapped in a child's body. And I realized something else, something I hadn't wanted to admit since the first blast. This wasn't about writing out a crisis. This was about building a life inside the ruins of the old one. I whispered, "I'm going." My wife didn't nod. She didn't cry. She just reached for my hand and held it like she was anchoring me to the world. I squeezed back, and in my head I saw the driveway, the van, the medicine inside it, the air outside, the dust you can't see, the numbers you can't ignore. The morning light grew a little brighter, and the world didn't feel new. It felt permanent. And I understood finally, with a clarity that hurt, nothing was going back to normal. Not after this. Not ever.
I didn't start this diary because I wanted to. I started it because I needed to remember what the first night felt like, in case we didn't get a second one. This is not a story about panic. It's a record of what we did, and why we stayed alive.
A Prepper's Diary, The First Blast. Entry 5, The Cost of the Right Choice. Early morning, hour 36. The coughing pulled me out of sleep so abruptly that my heart was already racing before my eyes opened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. That's what scared me. It was deep, low in his chest, the kind of cough that sounds like the body is trying to clear something that won't move. Each one ended with a wheeze that lingered just a moment longer than it should have, like air hesitating before deciding whether it could leave his lungs or not. I rolled onto my side and pushed myself up on one elbow, already scanning the room. The lantern still burned low and steady. Battery levels fine. Air monitor still green. Nothing else had changed, except him. He was curled inward, knees drawn up, one hand pressed flat against his chest like he was trying to hold something in. His breathing was fast, shallow, each inhale pulling hard, each exhale whistling faintly through tightened airways. I knelt beside him and placed my hand on his back. I could feel it immediately. The effort. His ribs expanding farther than they should, muscles between them tightening to pull air that wasn't cooperating. I started counting breaths without realizing I was doing it. 1, 2, 3. Too fast. I leaned closer and spoke softly. "I've got you, buddy. I'm right here. Slow breaths. In with me. I exaggerated my own breathing, letting him hear it. His eyes opened just enough to see me. They looked tired. That scared me more than the coughing. 36 hours since impact. I checked my watch. 36 hours. That number had become a dividing line in my mind. Before. After. 36 hours since the sky flashed white in the distance. 36 hours since Chicago stopped being a city and became a data point. We were far enough away to survive the blast itself. The shockwave had never reached us. No windows shattered. No structural damage. But fallout doesn't care about distance the same way explosions do. I ran the numbers again because numbers were something solid. Something real. Chicago ground zero estimates. 1,000 rads per hour. Distance to us. Roughly 100 to more 150 miles, depending on plume direction. Only about 10 to 15% of physical fallout particles would reach this far. That knocked initial exposure down to 100 to 150 rads per hour at peak. Time works in your favor with radiation. After about 36 hours, levels drop roughly 90%. That still leaves 10 to 15 rads per hour outside. That's not safe. That's not something you live in, but it's survivable. Briefly, I looked back down at my son. He didn't have the luxury of waiting for numbers to improve. The realization. The wheezing deepened. It wasn't panic-induced. It wasn't fear. It was physiological. Asthma doesn't care about preparedness levels or moral certainty. It cares about air. We had the medication, but it was upstairs, in the van. Because when the blast hit, speed mattered more than perfection. I felt my chest tighten, not from radiation, not from fear, but from the understanding that there was no alternative. This wasn't a debate. This was a requirement. I looked up. My wife was already awake. She sat rigidly against the wall, legs drawn in, arms wrapped around herself. Not shaking, not crying, just watching. Ready. She met my eyes. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The decision had already been made by his lungs. The radio. Before I moved toward the gear, I reached for the radio. Not because I expected good news, because silence is worse than bad news. The unit sat on the shelf where I'd left it. Antenna extended, batteries still holding strong. I turned the dial slowly, letting static hiss and snap between frequencies. Emergency channels first, then local AM, then the civil defense band. For a moment, there was nothing, just the low, empty crackle of a world that had gone quiet. Then a voice cut through, not polished, not calm, but steady.
This is an emergency broadcast relay. Repeat, this is an emergency broadcast relay operating under continuity of government protocols.
I froze. The kids looked up immediately. So did my wife. I turned the volume down just enough so it wouldn't echo off the concrete walls. The voice continued.
There have been no additional nuclear detonations confirmed in the last 24 hours. Strategic nuclear forces remain at elevated readiness levels. NORAD and U.S. Strategic Command report no new launch signatures.
I felt something loosen in my chest. Just a fraction. No additional launches didn't mean safety, but it meant restraint. It meant someone was still counting. The announcer paused, likely listening to instructions fed to him in real time.
Cyber and communications disruptions are ongoing, but military cyber units and National Guard signal teams have re-established limited access to core command and control systems. Emergency governance remains in effect.
That one mattered. That meant this wasn't total collapse. Not yet.
Radiological monitoring stations report significant decay in airborne fallout levels across southern and south-central Michigan. Current estimates show a substantial reduction since initial plume passage.
I glanced at my watch again. 36 hours. The math tracked. Then came the line that mattered most.
Residents are strongly advised to remain indoors. Outdoor exposure should be limited to absolute life-threatening emergencies only. Protective equipment is recommended for any unavoidable exterior movement.
I looked down at my son. His breathing rattled again. Shallow, strained, stubborn. Life-threatening emergency. That phrase had a weight to it now. The voice softened slightly. Not in tone, but in cadence.
Emergency services are unavailable in most areas. Self-sheltering remains the primary survival strategy.
The transmission ended abruptly. Static rushed back in. I shut the radio off. The room felt heavier, not because of fear, because the decision had been confirmed. This wasn't panic. This wasn't impulse. This was doctrine. This was exactly the scenario we had planned for, and exactly the moment you hope never comes. I looked at my wife. She already knew. She always did. Risk assessment. If I went out, it had to be fast. Time was everything. Gamma radiation couldn't be stopped. It would pass through concrete, through walls, through me. But dose depended on duration, not armor. Alpha and beta particles were different. Those were the real contamination threat. Those stuck to dust, to fabric, to skin. Those could be blocked. A full suit would stop alpha entirely. Beta too, as long as I didn't tear anything. A full-face respirator with P100 filters would stop particulate inhalation. No skin exposed, no kneeling, no touching anything unnecessary, no stirring dust. 10 minutes in, 15 at absolute maximum. Anything more than that started pushing into dangerous territory. I nodded once. My wife nodded back. That was it. Gearing up, I moved slowly on purpose. Rushing makes mistakes. Mistakes kill people you love. First, the base layer. Long sleeves, tight cuffs, everything tucked in. Then the suit. Tyvek. Stiff, loud, unforgiving. I stepped into it carefully, pulling it up inch by inch, making sure it didn't snag. The zipper sounded deafening in the sealed basement. I hated that sound. I taped the zipper seam, then the wrists, then the ankles. Gloves next. Nitrile first, then thicker outer gloves on top. Double layered. Boots went over the suit legs, not under. Tape again. Everything sealed. I checked myself in the small mirror we kept for this exact purpose. No gaps. No exposed skin. Then the respirator. I seated it carefully, pulling the straps tight in sequence. Top, middle, bottom. I exhaled hard. No leaks. Filters locked in place. P100. Rated to stop 99.97% of airborne particles. It wouldn't stop gamma, but it would stop everything else that could hitch a ride inside my lungs. The hood went up last. I felt sealed in, cut off, isolated. That's when it hit me. If something went wrong out there, they would never hear my voice again. The kids. They were watching, all three of them. Quiet, too aware. I knelt in front of them, the suit crinkling as I moved. "Dad needs to get medicine," I said calmly. "I'll be back really fast. Stay with Mom." The oldest nodded immediately. The middle one stared, eyes fixed on the mask. The youngest coughed again. That sound cut straight through everything else. The cabinet. My wife moved behind me. I heard the cabinet unlock. The locked one. She waited until the kids were turned away. Then she hugged me. Tight, pressing her face into my shoulder like she was trying to memorize the feel of me. Something cold slipped into my hand. Heavy, solid. My pistol. Her voice was barely there. "Just in case." Then even quieter, "Come back to us." I closed my hand around it. I nodded. If I tried to speak, I would have failed. Breaking containment. The plastic barriers peeled back one by one. Tape snapped loose. Each layer felt like crossing a threshold. Once I went upstairs, there was no pretending anymore. The house looked exactly like we had left it. Furniture untouched. Pictures still straight. Shoes by the door. No dust coating everything like in the movies. That somehow made it worse. It felt frozen, like time had simply stopped. Silence. No wind. No birds. No distant engines. Silence so complete it pressed inward. I paused at the front door longer than I meant to, listening, as if the world might warn me. It didn't. Outside. The door opened. Cold air rushed around the seals of my suit. The sky was pale, clean, too clean. The driveway looked normal. That was unsettling. I moved fast, straight to the van. The van. Unlocked. Of course it was. Her keys sat right where she always left them. I felt an unexpected laugh escape inside the mask. A memory. Me getting annoyed, telling her not to leave her purse and keys in the van. Every single time. Now it felt like a gift. I grabbed the inhaler and the spare medication. Checked my watch. 7 minutes. Too long already. The shoe. That's when I saw it. Near the tall bushes. A shoe, lying on its side. Something about it pulled my attention immediately. I told myself to leave it. I didn't. I walked closer. The Geiger counter clicked louder now. Faster. Then I saw the leg. My stomach dropped so hard it felt physical. I moved the branches aside. Recognition. It was her, the woman from the first day, the one who knocked, the one I turned away. She was lying on her side, half hidden, eyes open, face pale and still. She hadn't made it far. My mind flashed back instantly. Her voice, her eyes, the moment I closed the door. At the time, it had felt like the right decision. Protect the family, maintain containment, no unknowns. Now she was here, dead, alone. If I had let her in, she would still be breathing. That realization hit like a physical blow. I stood there frozen, heart pounding so hard I could hear it inside the mask. This was the cost of the right choice. No decision without consequence. No clean hands. The Geiger counter screamed louder. That snapped me back. I couldn't help her now, and staying would only hurt the people who still depended on me. I turned away. Returning, every step back felt heavier. Inside the house, I resealed everything with shaking hands. Down the stairs, I stripped the suit methodically. Boots, outer gloves, inner gloves, hood, mask. Each piece set aside carefully. I knocked. Decontamination. The door cracked open. The medicine went straight into soapy water. She wiped it down carefully. I wiped myself quickly. Neck, hands, face. Not perfect, but effective. The suit had done its job. Waiting. We gave him the medicine and waited. Minutes stretched. Then slowly, his breathing eased. The wheeze softened. Not gone, but better. I sat back against the wall, exhaustion finally crashing over me. After the medicine, we didn't celebrate when his breathing slowed. No cheering, no relief-filled laughter. We just listened. My wife stayed kneeling beside our youngest, 4 years old. One hand on his chest, the other brushing sweat-damp hair off his forehead. Like if she kept contact, she could anchor him to the room. I sat across from them on the floor, back against the wall, watching the rise and fall of his small ribs. The wheeze softened. The spaces between breaths stretched just enough to notice. He wasn't better, but he was stable, and right now, that was everything. Quiet work. Nobody spoke for a while. Then my oldest stood up, 8 years old. Old enough to understand more than he should. He didn't ask what to do. He just started helping. He checked the water jugs like he'd seen me do 100 times, tightened a cap, straightened a container, counted quietly under his breath. My middle boy, 6, followed him, lining up the food bins so the labels faced out, like we were running a store and not hiding underground. Small things, but deliberate. My wife met my eyes over our youngest head and gave the smallest nod. They were adapting, not because we gave a speech, because this is what families do when there's no one else coming. Adapting. The world above us wasn't coming back the way it was. We all knew that now. But down here, the systems were holding. The air was clean. The power was steady. The routines mattered. We adjusted without calling it adjustment. Dinner became portions. Bedtime became shifts. Noise became a choice. Not because we were broken, because we were learning how to live in what remained. Strength. I watched my wife move through the room, calm, focused, unshakable. She didn't wait for permission, didn't spiral, didn't fall apart in front of them. She just did what needed doing, and somehow made it feel normal enough for our boys to breathe. even when one of them already couldn't. I looked at my sons again. 8, 6, and 4, curled under a blanket, medicine finally giving him room to rest. They were growing up in a world that would demand more from them than it ever should. But they wouldn't be weak. They wouldn't be alone. They would learn from us. And they would become the kind of men who don't panic when things get dark, because they've already lived through dark and kept moving anyway. What remains? We are scared. That hasn't changed. But fear doesn't mean failure. It means we're paying attention. It means we still have something to protect. The world outside may be broken, but inside these walls, we are still a family, still thinking, still working, still adapting. And as long as we have that, we have a way forward.